My name is Donna Walsh, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer at the International Bureau for Epilepsy, or IBE. It's a real pleasure for me to address today's meeting and to present to you the results of our Global Epilepsy Needs Study, which I hope will contextualize some of the discussions to come over the course of the day. To begin, I would like to introduce you to IBE. We are a global organization. We have 160 member organizations, which we call chapters, in over 110 countries worldwide, covering all 7 regions of the World Health Organization. Our aim is to achieve a transformational social change for people with epilepsy worldwide, and we do this by pursuing 3 strategic goals. The first is to position epilepsy as a global public health priority. The second is around empowering and amplifying the voice of people with epilepsy. And the third is around serving and supporting our network of chapters worldwide. Now, we're often asked, what do we mean by a transformational social change? And this is a question that we've also been reflecting on ourselves within IBE. For us, it's really important to understand what matters most to people with epilepsy, and that's why we embarked on a groundbreaking new initiative, the Global Epilepsy Needs Study. Our aim was simple. We wanted to identify the current global, unmet, everyday needs of people with epilepsy beyond seizures. Now, before we started our study, we conducted a rapid literature review. And what we saw was that what is usually documented when it comes to the needs of people with epilepsy is referring to seizures, seizure burden, seizure frequency, seizure duration. And of course, this is hugely important because seizures play a huge role in the quality of life of people with epilepsy. But we all know that epilepsy is more than just seizures. And so we worked very closely with a focus group of people with lived experience to help us to design a study that very much addressed their wider needs. We had 2 main research tools, a GEN survey, which was completed by 250 people at least in each of our 15 focus countries, and I'll show you our focus countries shortly, as well as a set of semi-structured interviews, which were again conducted in each of our focus countries, and for which at least 5 people with lived experience of epilepsy were interviewed. We engaged a UK-based research organisation called Medipace to ensure that we developed a scientifically robust methodology. They supported us with ethics approval, data protection agreements, and an expert advisory board, a multi-stakeholder group that really did provide their professional expertise and experience to our work. And the results were validated by both our organisations at the local level and by a high-level validation group. Those who participated in the study were either 18 years old or over. Those under 18 caregivers were invited to take the survey on their behalf. And we were really looking to understand the needs of people with epilepsy themselves. So we did not collect caregiver experiences, and those caregivers that did participate were replying on behalf of the individual they cared for. We believe that the co-creation process we undertook as IBE in designing the Global Epilepsy Study allowed us to really create an instrument that captured the most meaningful insights possible. This is a quote from one of our survey participants who wanted to thank IBE for designing what they called an amazing survey. They said, "Every question I answered was like you knew my struggles personally, and it was very emotional." And that's exactly what we wanted to do, to create an instrument that could collect the everyday needs of our community and to be able to highlight that to our global audience. Now, as I said earlier, we had 15 focus countries selected. We had a set of criteria to choose countries, which included having an active community on the ground that could help us deliver the study in these geographies. We also wanted to include countries from each of our 7 regions and ensure that we had a balance between high, middle, and low income countries and different realities for the epilepsy community. So we believe that this is quite a representative sample. In North America, we had Canada and the USA. In Latin America, we looked at Argentina and Brazil. In Africa, we studied the Gambia and Uganda. In our Eastern Mediterranean region, Tunisia. In Europe, we had 4 countries, Spain, Denmark, Croatia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And in Asia, Oceania, we covered China and Hong Kong, South Korea, India, and Australia. In the black box, you'll see the number of responses we collected in each country, and in the white box, the number of semi-structured interviews that were conducted. The survey looked across 10 domains of life that our community of people with epilepsy told us were important to them. This was also informed by the Expert Advisory Board and the results of the narrative literature review that was carried out. So, of course, we looked at healthcare and well-being, but we also looked at mental health. We looked at sexual and reproductive health, but we looked at other sectors of society too, areas like learning and education, work and income, transport and driving, and topics like knowledge and advice, safety and security, achieving life goals, and even community and relationships. And we had over 5,000 people with epilepsy share their views with us across those 10 domains. For each domain, there was a set of preconceived statements. People with epilepsy or their caregivers were asked to choose which statements were relevant for them, and then they were asked to prioritize whether this was a low priority or an urgent priority for them. And I'll take you to the results in a second. But I first want to give you a flavour of who we heard from. So as usual, we had more female respondents than males, but we still had over 35% male responses. The majority of participants came from urban settings, but we also had 20% from suburban communities and almost 20% from rural communities. Again, the majority of respondents were people with epilepsy, but over 40% of respondents were caregivers. You'll see too that there was a split between high and middle income respondents and just over 10% from low income settings. And a really nice set of age ranges contributed to our study, and it really allowed us to look at these needs across the life course. So these then are the 10 most frequently selected needs across all survey domains globally. And you'll see that from my perspective, they fall into 3 main themes. The top ranked need is around easier access to healthcare services or to healthcare professionals who treat epilepsy. But people also told us that those healthcare professionals need to know more about the wider needs of people with epilepsy. There was a call for healthcare professionals also to better address the mental health, including stress levels of people with epilepsy, and faster access to the right treatment was called for. The sort of second set of needs really fall into the category of awareness of epilepsy. Many people telling us that their local community needs to know more about epilepsy, that basic seizure first aid should be more widely known in societies, and that people should feel confident that they will get the help and support they need during an epilepsy emergency. And then the final set of needs, I think, can be bucketed into that group of human rights. People saying that their countries need to better recognise and defend the human rights of people with epilepsy. Now, as well as ranking the needs across the survey, we also merged the survey data with the qualitative data that we managed to gather through the semi-structured interview. And with a team of analysts, we came up with 5 generalized themes or generalized statements that we feel capture the needs of people with epilepsy across the world. And I will take you through each of these 5 areas in turn. So let's start with number 1, which is around navigating uncertainty and redefining daily life. So many people with epilepsy told us that they are concerned about the physical risk inherent to epilepsy. Will I be hurt if I have a seizure in public? Will I be safe if I have a seizure in the community? And the emotional uncertainty and psychological strain that brings. Because of this, people with epilepsy often see barriers to their participation in everyday activities and in social recreational settings. And of course, it's not just about day-to-day life, it's also about the future. Will I be able to stay at school? Will I be able to get a job? Will I be able to get married and become a parent? And you can see here that we've included a number of key insights which show that actually women feel this physical and emotional risk more so than men. And there's a quote from an older female in China who says, "When I first found out about my condition, it felt as if a heavy boulder had been placed on my heart, creating an immense psychological burden." And those sentiments were echoed by people who spoke to us across the study. Moving on then to number 2, which is a related theme focused on living with risk, social exclusion, and misunderstanding. So again here, people speaking about their concerns of inadequate emergency response. If I have a seizure, will someone come to my aid quickly enough and efficiently enough? And if not, I am vulnerable in that scenario. You can see here that the need to feel safe from being physically hurt by others came up quite strongly, particularly in low income settings, and women were also more likely to express that need compared to men. Women also spoke about feeling safe from emotional harm, and this was not just in external settings, but also within their own intimate and romantic relationships. And of course, if you are feeling vulnerable and unsafe, that is going to be a barrier to your personal and professional development. There's a really emotional quote here from an individual in Uganda who says, "He was beaten up and he died of his injuries. I have a feeling that he might have been like me." So this young man believes that his friend was beaten up and died because he had epilepsy, and he is concerned that he may face the same scenario. Challenge number 3 is around navigating inaccessible systems. And of course, here we're talking about barriers to accessible healthcare and gaps in the quality of care and support that people with epilepsy receive. And you can see from the slides earlier on that the top need across the world for people with epilepsy was the need for easier access to healthcare services and healthcare professionals. But people also spoke about faster access to the right treatment and, of course, ongoing access to that treatment. And as you can see from the statistics, this was also significantly higher in low-income settings compared to high-income settings. And I don't think that that is a huge surprise. But we're also seeing here issues around barriers to equitable education, structural barriers to employment, and challenges in the workplace. And I think driving and transportation is also an area that we need to consider when it comes to epilepsy. Many people with epilepsy, of course, don't have driving licenses. And if the public transport system is not accessible, then that can really put up barriers to an individual's independence. And what I also want to focus in on here are barriers to mental health support. You saw on the last slide that a lot of people spoke about barriers in access to epilepsy care, but we also heard a lot of concerns around access to mental health care for people with epilepsy. There's a quote here from an older male in Tunisia who said, "I wasn't referred to a psychiatrist by my neurologist, despite the fact that I had shown symptoms of depression. It was my family who supported me, who demanded I see a psychiatrist, but it was late in life and I had already ruined my marriage." So it's really important that we look beyond seizures when we're understanding how to best support people with epilepsy. Number 4 then is consequences of inaccessible or inadequate information. And here people spoke about health information shortfalls, people not getting high quality information from healthcare professionals or healthcare professionals not knowing enough about people's wider needs. And because of these knowledge gaps, people with epilepsy found it quite difficult to plan not just day to day, but also into the future. People spoke too about existing widespread misunderstanding of epilepsy, saying that communities need to get rid of old or incorrect beliefs that still persist, and that families also need to learn more about epilepsy. And again, I've included two quite different quotes, one from Uganda, where caregivers of a child with complex epilepsy told us that some of their community believed they had offered the child up as a sacrifice. And in Bosnia, somebody telling us that doctors are often not very well informed about epilepsy and that they have had to go and find their own knowledge through research and, of course, through their personal experience. And then finally, something maybe a little bit different, and that is that complex epilepsy. And here we're talking maybe about treatment resistant, refractory, rare genetic epilepsies, of course, demand more than standard approaches. And there were three main areas that came up in this domain. Access to care, of course, top of the list. The need for easier access to epilepsy healthcare services, not just to treat epilepsy, but dedicated supports for complex epilepsy cases. And there's a quote here that I won't read because it's quite lengthy. It's from Canada, which is a high-income country. And a family saying they needed to take their child over the border to a neighbouring country because they had been waiting over 6 months for testing in their own country and being passed from primary care to secondary care to tertiary care without any answers. In Bosnia, again, a quote here saying, when we go to a pediatrician and mention epilepsy or intellectual disability, they throw their hands up and say they can't help. So we need to ensure that we are also training and building the capacity of healthcare professionals, including non-specialist healthcare professionals, to really support those with epilepsy and in particular complex epilepsies. The other element of this was around cognitive, emotional, and developmental needs, which we know that many children in particular living with rare or developmental and epileptic encephalopathies can be exposed to. So a lot of people telling us they needed help managing wider health problems and for healthcare that addresses specific needs. And you can see here in the quotes that those needs range from things like behavioral, mood disorders, unpredictability, pain, anxiety, and so on. And then finally, the burden of caregiving itself. So as I said earlier, we didn't set out to capture the needs of caregivers. The caregivers who responded were asked to respond on behalf of the individual with epilepsy. But particularly in the semi-structured interviews, caregivers did share with us some of their own concerns and the impact and the burden that caregiving has on their own lives. And they called for inclusive social activities for caregivers and those they care for. And you can see here again from the quotes, people saying, really, we can't leave the house. We are working 24/7. There's chronic strain, undercurrents of stress. And I think we need to be very mindful that when we're talking about the needs of people with epilepsy, we need to consider the whole family unit and all those involved. So what are we going to do with this data? Well, first and foremost, we are going to publish a scientific research article in Epilepsy Open. This will be open access, so it means that everybody will be able to read the article and also download the supplementary materials. But we need to take it further because this is a first of its kind global study. It's been designed and delivered with and by our community, and it has provided us with a comprehensive picture of the everyday unmet needs of people with epilepsy for the first time. So we now have this critical evidence base for ourselves at IBE, for our chapters, the epilepsy support organizations around the world, for healthcare professionals, but also for other stakeholders like policymakers, decision makers, the pharmaceutical industry, and so on. And it really will be the basis for driving progress and further work. For us, GENS will absolutely inform IBE's strategic direction and our annual operational plans. The work that we do currently at IBE falls into these 4 action areas: knowledge creation and exchange, and GENS is an example of exactly that. Capacity building, or supporting the development of our network of organizations and advocates. Partnership development, because we can't address the needs of people with epilepsy alone. and we need to ensure that we are working with others who have expertise and experience across some of those wider sectors of society that I've just been speaking to you about. And of course, awareness raising and advocacy for change. So what does that look like in practice? Let's take a look at capacity building. So at IBE, we have a global exchange. It's housed within our IBE Knowledge Hub, which is a platform that brings together our network of organizations from across the world. And we have shared learning groups within this hub. Each of the shared learning groups is initiated with a webinar where we bring together chapters who can share best practice and engage in peer-to-peer learning and support. And we will ensure that each of those webinars in the years to come is contextualized and grounded within the needs of epilepsy. And the best practice or case studies that are shared by our chapters are put forward as solutions that can help to address the needs of our community. Of course, we also need to meet and engage offline. And as IBE, we have been running chapter conventions regionally over the past number of years. Here's some pictures and the reports from Africa and from Asia, Oceania. And in each of these meetings, we have an opportunity not just to present the needs of people with epilepsy, but to discuss regional solutions that we can undertake together to address those needs. And of course, as you've seen, a lot of what we've heard from people with epilepsy is focused on the role that can be played by healthcare professionals. And so we need to ensure that the needs of people with epilepsy are integrated into opportunities for medical education, in our case through congresses. These are some pictures from the International Epilepsy Congress 2025, where we presented the early insights from GENS. This was the most well-attended session at the Congress, and we believe that if clinicians are exposed to the needs of people with epilepsy, then we can improve clinical practice. Of course, advocacy and awareness raising is absolutely essential. We now have an intersectoral global action plan on epilepsy and other neurological disorders. There is a specific strategic objective within that plan that calls on governments around the world to strengthen the public health approach to epilepsy. And our global epilepsy need study can and should be used to inform how governments create policies, programs, and initiatives addressing the needs of people with epilepsy in their countries. WHO has a number of tools aimed at policymakers and decision makers, as well as other stakeholders, around how IGAP should be implemented. But as IBE, it's really important that we continue to equip our advocates and our organizations to ensure that any implementation is meaningful and that any actions address the needs of people with epilepsy. And so we have developed this suite of tools that our community can use to make noise and to raise awareness of the needs and the solutions that we want to see being put forward at both a regional and national level. And we will continue to use platforms like International Epilepsy Day or our 50 Million Steps campaign, not just to raise awareness, but to encourage the community to come together and to commit to take action to address the needs that we have captured through GENS. As I said earlier, partnership development is essential. IBE is a small global organization. We don't have the resources to be able to run or to fund projects or initiatives across the world, targeting all of the needs that have been communicated to us by our community. But we can use our global platform to raise awareness and to advocate for change. And these are some pictures over the last 12 months or so where representatives from IBE have engaged in high-level discussions at the World Health Assembly, at the UN General Assembly, within the European Parliament, within meetings of the regional WHO offices, and beyond. So as I said, our scientific publication is a first step. The GENS Policy Advocacy Report and the associated dissemination materials will allow us to bring that scientific publication and findings to a wider community of stakeholders. We will continue to do some deep dives into subpopulations where we have identified statistically significant needs, such as women, such as caregivers, such as low and middle income settings. And we will also explore the needs of people with DEEs, which is developmental and epileptic encephalopathies, or rare genetic epilepsies, as this emerged as an area that needed more focus. For us, as I've said, the Global Epilepsy Needs Study was a first of its kind approach to really capture the global needs of our community. And what we're really pleased is that it is resonating with people with lived experience. This is a quote from someone who attended one of our sessions and said, "I've nodded so much this morning, my head has almost fallen off." And so I think we've done a good job in capturing the needs of people with epilepsy across the world. And we haven't done it on our own. As I mentioned earlier, we've worked hand in hand with people with epilepsy, with our network of chapter organizations across the world, with a team of expert advisors, healthcare professionals, researchers, Medipace, our research partner, and we are thankful to the support we received from our partners to be able to fund an ambitious study of this kind. So I really hope that the needs that you have heard today, the needs of people with epilepsy across the world, will guide your work as you move forward, and we look forward to continuing to work with you to make this change a reality. Thank you for listening.